Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a retired U.S. Coast Guard commander with 25 years of military service. He holds a Bachelor of Aeronautics from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Now he has logged over 7,000 hours in his 10 years as a school volunteer. His children's books have themes of courage, teamwork, and trust. No surprise, as those topics describe his own life as an extraordinary public servant. Bravery and honor run deep in his family as he hails from a descendant of a Revolutionary War veteran who served as George Washington's bodyguard during the Battle of Yorktown. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Darcy Guyant.
Good morning, Julia. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Darcy, as you well know, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, the simple answer to that is motivation. I didn't have any until late in my 50s. I, as you mentioned, spent 25 years in the military as a helicopter pilot. And when I retired in 2005, I had an inkling or an idea of maybe just writing down some of the significant events that happened during my time in the military, and of course why I went into the military and so forth. But it just kind of sat there, and I really didn't have any motivation or reason why to do it until 2020, the year 2020, my granddaughter was born, and she's now 4.5. But when my granddaughter came along, and started thinking, you know what, it'd be nice to leave some information behind for her, a legacy. I am a seventh generation descendant of a Revolutionary War veteran, and we know very little about his life before the war or after the war. He lived to be 83, and he died in 1834 or 35. But we have some information about his war service from a document that he filled out. But I've always wondered, well, what he immigrated from England. Why? What brought him here? What did he do before the war? What did he do after the war? What was life like for him? So I've often wondered about that. So when my granddaughter came along, I'm thinking, okay, it's time to take this idea of recording some of my experiences and put it down in a book. So I wrote a memoir. I picked 12 significant events from my life, some of it prior to going into the military while I was a teenager, and then some of it is what I've been doing since retiring, and then a lot of stories from when I was in the Army and the Coast Guard. So that simple answer was my granddaughter and leaving something behind for her.
Well, I find it very difficult to believe that you're not highly motivated at all times. And thank you so much for your military service. 25 years in the military and now 7,000 hours in the school systems. And since your first book, you've become quite prolific writing children's books. Were those inspired by your volunteer work in schools?
Partially, yes. After, I got motivated to write the memoir, I shared my book with some of the teachers that I work with. I work primarily with first grade teachers and students. And I have a lot of experience of reading children's books with kids. So I know the different topics and what kids like. And some of the teachers I work with, after they read my memoir, said, you could take some of these stories and make them into a children's book. And that kind of got my wheels turning. And then I thought about my granddaughter again. And yeah, so I that was what kind of motivated me to do my first children's book. I took one of my experiences from my memoir, a search and rescue mission that I did with the Coast Guard, and told it in a way that would be a children's story. So I told it the children's book from the perspective of the helicopter. The helicopter has eyes. The helicopter can talk. He has a name, and he has a pilot. And the pilot's name is Gwen. So I wrote it because kids like objects like that, animals that can talk, and now it's a helicopter that can talk. And I used a female protagonist, the pilot, because I wanted my granddaughter to have somebody to look up to or emulate someday. So that's kind of how I got started. And so I did the first book. It was light. I did started reading it to a lot of classes and classrooms, and then I just said, well, okay, I'll do another one, and then another one. And so my third book is a third in the series, children's book series, is coming out next month. It'll be published next month. And of course, I've got the wheels turning in my head now for many, many more subjects in the children's book series. So I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. I'm on a roll. So I don't know why I would stop. So,
No, and I think grandchildren can certainly motivate us. They did
mhm,
me, and you use the word that I use a lot, legacy. And I
right.
think just leaving something behind, especially with the history in your family, I think that's just so fascinating. I was an adopted child, and I did one of those DNA kits and
Mhm.
found out so much. And it's just so interesting to find where you've come from and if you know anything about those ancestors, and if you don't, you can certainly make up fiction about them and write a
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. Yes, you can. Yeah. Mhm.
Well, after you wrote that first children's book or even your memoir, did that change your process of writing?
The memoir took me a long time to write because I'm not a writer. I only wrote because of job requirements. I had to. I never really had a desire to want to write a book, but so I had to do a lot of research. I did a lot of reading about how to tell a good story, how to write a book, how to write a memoir, and how to publish it. And I decided to self-publish because it's a memoir. No major publisher is going to want my book. I'm not famous or anything like that, so I just did it myself. And then I decided to continue on that same self-publishing process or route with my children's books, um, which I'm glad I did. I learned a lot in my first book, shifting from memoir to now writing children's books, and again having to do a lot of research on, well, how do you do that, and what makes a good children's book, and so forth. So it was a big learning process. But I guess the easy thing about doing a memoir and my children's books is they're all based on my story, true life events. I didn't have to create or imagine anything like a novel or a fiction. It's uh, it's a real story, so it was easy for me to come up with the plot and tell the story. I just had to modify it to tell it in a way that, especially with the kids, that the kids could understand and bring it shorter. My first draft of my first children's book, I shared it with some of the teachers that have been encouraging me. And the first teacher said was, too long. You got to cut this out. You got to stream it down. I'm like, and then she told me a very important tip. In a children's book, it's illustrated. So you don't have to be descriptive because you have illustrations that are going to help you tell the story. And it's like, oh yeah. So that was really, really helpful to remember. I'm going to have an illustrator and illustrations. So I think they recommend for the age group that I'm targeting, like first, second grade, they say no more than 600 to 800 words. So far, all three of my children's books have come out to be 1,000, right around 1,000 words. I just can't get it any shorter. But because of the topic and how my books are, they're an adventure story and they're pretty fast moving and they're sort of an edge of your seat suspense type thing. And the illustrations are very active and engaging. I never have a problem with kids getting bored or start to get the wiggles before I get to the end of the book. They stay focused all the way through the 1,000 words because they're really into it. So it hasn't been a problem. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. I know even adults have short attention spans, so you have to keep our attention too. But, it's
Mm-hmm.
so meaningful for you to tell real life stories to children. I don't think that many of us even knew what people in the military did unless we had someone in our family who could
Mm-hmm.
explain to us. And I think it's so wise to be able to tell children stories and actual events of what
Mm-hmm.
happens in certain careers.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of things that, especially with the Coast Guard being a small service, if you don't live near where the Coast Guard operates, most people don't even know what they do. My grandparents, who used to live in Wisconsin when they were alive, always confused the Coast Guard with the National Guard. So for a long time, they kept thinking I was in the National Guard, and I kept trying to tell them, well, Coast Guard is different, but I mean, that's part of the education process and why I like telling kids about it, just letting them know about the Coast Guard, who they are, what they do, careers potentially, and so forth. But
Well, when you were in the military, you probably were forced to be an early riser. Do you have a specific writing routine early morning, or are you a late night person?
oh, I am definitely a morning person. Um, I think I grew up in a family of farmers, and I used to, as a teenager, work on my grandpa's farm in the summers. And I think there's just something in my genes, in the farmer's genes, that gets passed down that makes you an early morning person. So I do more before noon than most people do all day, but by 8 o'clock, I'm done. I'm ready for bed. So that's where I do most of my effective writing and thinking. It's in the morning. Yeah.
That's the way my husband is. He gets up at 3:30 every morning to work
Mhm.
out, and he has for 25 years. And I told him he should have been in the military. And then my
Yeah.
father grew up on a dairy farm, and
Yep.
like you say, the farmers always got up at before dawn
Oh
and
yeah.
went to bed
Mhm.
at dark, and that's what they wanted to do for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a habit you get into, and it's hard to break.
Well, all of us writers like to write. We don't always like to promote ourselves, and it's difficult for a lot of introverts who are writers. Have you overcome any challenges for publicity? Have you found anything that's worked or something that you've tried that hasn't worked to promote your books?
Um, that has been the biggest challenge for me, getting the books out and published. It took work, but I learned how to do it, and it's a relatively easy process. It's the marketing and the promoting that nobody really warned me about that when I started writing my books. So I've had to spend a lot of time now that I have books out there. If I want people to read them or find them, you got to promote them. Otherwise, it's it's a needle in a haystack trying to find a book nowadays, and you have to get it in front of people. And I have found one of the best things and the funnest things is collaborating with other children's book authors. There are several children's book authors that I around the country that we help to promote each other's books through different events. Um, we're not competitors in a marketplace, we're collaborators because we know that of the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of children's books out there, the dozen or so children's book authors that I collaborate with, yeah, let's see if we can help each other in getting our books out there. So that has been helpful. Doing podcasts, of course, like this, I'm hoping will be another inroad. I think the biggest thing and the funnest thing for me is getting out and doing events, reading at schools. I love going to schools and doing school visits and reading my stories to schools and seeing the kids' reactions. And then, of course, they're excited and they go home and tell their parents. And then now the parents want to buy the books. So that has been one of the bigger things that's worked for me. Yeah.
And it sounds like you could really capture the niche that you're in, with military families, especially the
Mhm.
Coast Guard, and
Right.
grandparents don't just pick up one book. I love the idea of your collaboration, especially at book fairs and libraries. Every library has book clubs, and I just think a grandparent's going to pick up your book and then your friend's
Mhm.
book and somebody else's book and gather up a lot of books for their grandchildren.
Right. Yeah. There is a woman, her name is Liz Booker. She is a retired Coast Guard helicopter pilot, just like I am. But she promotes books that are about women in aviation or written by women who are in aviation. And it's usually an aviation topic, but I'm not a woman, but because of the topic or the protagonist of my book, she saw the illustration and she went, "Wow, I wish I had seen this book when I was a young girl." So she has been a tremendous supporter of my books and encouraging that and her through her website and through her podcast. She has a podcast also promoting women in aviation. But so it's and the niche, that's the niche that you just talked about is Coast Guard aviation, women in aviation, kids that are interested in things that fly. So that's all part of the niche that I need to really focus on.
And remember all those book fairs where we bought all those real inexpensive books years ago? I mean, it would be great to have a book fair with local authors and have parents be able to choose from local authors for their children at a book fair at the elementary schools or even the middle schools or high schools. I think that would be so much better than shipping in those flimsy little books, that
Yeah,
didn't last at some of those book fairs we had.
yeah, I agree. And I've done a few book fairs, and people started conversations. I love just having the conversations with people that come up. And sometimes there's retired military that will see my banner and my book, and they'll come up and we'll just talk about war stories, tell stories of what we did. And sometimes they buy books.
And it would be a great fundraiser for a school, for all the
Mhm.
authors to give a small percentage back to the schools.
Mhm. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, that might be a thing to pursue. Yeah.
Well, Darcy, why don't you tell us a little about the passage you've brought to share today and then read so we can hear your tone and voice in one of your books?
Okay. The book To Seek and to Save is my memoir, the first one I wrote, the one that kind of started the whole ball rolling here. And I've chosen a passage from chapter one, the beginning of the book, which also tells the story of how I ended up in the military and how I ended up flying. And you might find it interesting, a part of this about Alaska. But I'll go ahead and read from chapter one here. It's the title of chapter one is a TV commercial. And it starts with January 26, 1980. The throttle was pushed full forward to maximum power and the engine revved loudly. The rapidly spinning propeller blade directly in front of me was just a blur. I glanced down at the flight instruments and saw the aircraft was about 300 feet above the ground and we were climbing. The pointer on the airspeed indicator was holding steady at 70 knots. I looked over at the pilot seat next to me. It was empty. My adrenaline surged at the full realization of my situation became clear. I was sitting at the cockpit, in the cockpit of the airplane, flight controls in my hands, several hundred feet in the air, and I was alone. I had mixed emotions about the other seat being empty, but I could not afford to dwell on that. I needed to focus. I was solely responsible for control of this airplane. People's lives were literally in my hands. I took a quick look below me. I saw several roads and a highway packed with cars, a cramped neighborhood, an elementary school to my right front, a full Walmart parking lot to my left, and Lake Erie directly in front of me, stretching to the horizon. I couldn't help but think, if those people down there knew what was happening in this plane flying over their heads at that very moment, they would probably be concerned, very concerned. So how did I end up in this situation? Flashback, September 17th, 1979, 4 months earlier. It was the beginning of my senior year of high school. I was starting to feel the clock ticking down. I still had 9 months of school left, so I wasn't overly concerned yet, but I knew I needed to start thinking seriously about what I was going to do after high school. At that point, I really had no plan. I did not have an interest in or feel drawn toward any particular type of job or career field. I did like being outside, fishing, camping, and such, so maybe something like a game warden or a park ranger. I had just spent the summer working on my grandpa's farm and enjoyed that, so maybe something involving farming or agriculture. I had no specific plan or direction, and I was starting to feel some pressure. I was downstairs in the TV room watching Monday Night Football with my dad and my brother. A commercial came on during a break in the action, and it immediately caught my attention, as any good commercial does. It started out with the camera panning across a beautiful lake. The surface of the lake was deep blue and smooth as glass. Not a hint of wind disturbed the water. The lake was surrounded by tall evergreen trees. Far beyond the trees were rugged snow-capped peaks, mountain peaks. The only sound was that of a loon calling its mate. It was beautiful, serene setting. A moment later, an airplane with floats instead of wheels appeared as it banked left just over the treetops. The plane swooped in low over the treetops and descended to a smooth landing on the glassy surface of the lake. The plane coasted across the water and then up to the beach. Several guys climbed out of the plane and started fishing. They had a grand time hauling in huge trout. The screen then faded to a scene with the guys sitting around a campfire cooking their catch over an open fire. Their tents and the airplane were posed in the background, the firelight flickering off the trees. The guys laughed, swapped stories, and drank beer. The message appeared in the center of the screen, and a familiar jingle began to play. The message read, "It's Miller time." And the jingle goes, "When it's time to relax, one beer stands clear." It was a beer commercial. I sat watching, riveted. As the commercial ended, I had a sudden revelation. That's it. I suddenly knew what I wanted to do for a living. I wanted to be a bush pilot. I'd fly float planes to remote Alaskan wilderness lakes, take people fishing, hunting, and camping in the wilderness. I already had experience camping and fishing. All I needed to do was learn to fly an airplane. I turned to my dad and asked, how does someone get trained to fly airplanes and become a pilot? He said he didn't know exactly, but maybe I could go to the airport and pay someone to teach me to fly. I grabbed the phone book, turned to the yellow pages. Sure enough, there was a listing for a business at the Grosse Isle Airport that rented airplanes and provided flight instruction. Grosse Isle Airport is located on a large island at the south end of the Detroit River, right where the river empties into Lake Erie. It was only a 20-minute drive from where I lived in Lincoln Park, Michigan. So the rest of the story goes on that I started taking flying lessons my senior year in high school, and then I got interested in being a professional pilot, and
From
through
a Miller commercial.
it was a beer commercial, yeah, a Miller Time beer commercial. So you're welcome, Miller, Miller or Busch or whoever owns the beer company now. You're welcome for the plug.
That's great.
But yeah, that's how
Yeah.
my start.
Wow. Well, my husband was a general aviation pilot. He had a plane. And so I have a lot of hours in the right seat. And everybody encouraged me to take flight lessons, and I did. But I didn't solo. I just couldn't look over there like you did and see that empty seat next to me. So I backed out, and everybody said, well, you need to know how to fly and how to land that airplane in case something happens to your husband. I said, oh, yeah, well, I can get it all the way to the crash site.
Yeah.
Oh, me.
Yeah. So I was motivated by being a bush pilot, an Alaskan bush pilot landing on the water. I have never to this day flown in as a passenger on a float plane. I have flown in Alaska through my time in the Coast Guard, flying helicopters in Alaska. But I have yet, it's on my bucket list to do exactly what I saw in that commercial is get on a float plane, fly to a wilderness lake, go fishing and camping. So one of these days.
Just one of my favorite memories. I mean, Alaska is so beautiful, and
Mhm.
those float planes don't fly very high. So you get to see all the landscape, and you don't see
Oh,
any
yeah.
houses or any roads, or it's just gorgeous, gorgeous forestry and wildlife and
Oh, yeah.
landing in the water. It's just a thrill every time.
Yeah, it is. When I first joined the Coast Guard still had a helicopter that had a boat hull and it could land on the water and take off again. And so I flew that helicopter for about 6 months before it was finally retired and replaced with what they currently have now, the H-65. So I did do some water landings, but it was in a helicopter. And it's just not the same as, swooping in and landing. You just went straight up and down, so
Yeah. And of
different.
course, the fishing is really good there too. We brought home a lot of delicious salmon.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We lived on Kodiak Island and we loved our time there. So beautiful place. Yeah.
Well, Darcy, you wanted to read something from one of your children's books as well.
If you don't mind. Yeah.
We'd love
Um,
to.
so my first children's book is titled Into the Storm. And I'll just skip through and read a couple of significant passages from it just for the sake of time. And it starts out with whoop, whoop. Do you hear that loud siren? That is the search and rescue alarm. Someone needs our help. Hi, I'm Dolph. I'm a Coast Guard HH-65 Dolphin rescue helicopter, but you can just call me Dolph. I've been patiently waiting for the next rescue mission, and by the sound of the alarm, that will be right now. Here comes Gwen. She is my pilot. She runs out to join me when she hears the alarm. Gwen and I make a great team. We have flown together many times. We need each other to get the job done. Gwen tells us there's a fishing boat caught in a bad storm. The winds are very strong and the waves are huge. We need to get there fast before the boat sinks. Gwen gets me in the air and quickly turns us in the direction of the fishing boat. We are moving fast. I pray we can make it to them in time. As we approach the storm, it looks very serious. Gwen is flying us straight toward it. I'm beginning to feel a little nervous. Aren't we going to fly around this storm, Gwen? I asked timidly. That is what we normally do. Not this time, Dolph, Gwen says. The boat is in the middle of the storm, so we have to go straight into it to reach them. The men are in danger, so we need to get there as fast as we can. Gwen can tell I'm feeling a little scared. She says to me, Dolph, I'm a little scared too, but now is the time to show courage and trust each other. Keep your engines running strong, and we will all be fine. Gwen's words make me feel better. I do trust her. She is a very good pilot. We will all work together as a team, and each of us will do our part to save the men in the boat. And then it goes on to share the rest of the story of how they do deploy the rescue swimmer to the water, and they end up rescuing him, and they have a little problem toward the end of the story of running low on fuel, and that creates more stress, and so the lesson in the story for the kids is all about courage. You can be scared, but that's when you need to be brave also, and have courage, and how you get that courage. We talk about that when I do my classroom visits. Yeah, I read the story, and then we talk about well, how do we get courage? Who can help us with courage, and what do we do about that? So
That's great.
hmm.
What do you think writing success looks like to you personally?
Well, for me, when I read my story to a class of students, and I did a school assembly one time where I had probably over 400 kids sitting in the gymnasium. I read this story to them, and it was kids from kindergarten to fifth grade, and you could have heard a pin drop. They were and even the kindergartners who are very squirmy and wiggly sat transfixed in the story, looking at the illustrations and listening to the story. And the teachers came up to me afterwards and said, that was amazing. We have never seen an assembly go that smoothly or that under control as they listened to the speakers, just because they were really engrossed in the story. And that's when I know, okay, this is what I was meant to do. These are hitting a target audience with a type of story that there's not a lot out there. There's a lot for kids. There's a lot of stories that are all, unicorns and rainbows and glitter and talking animals, kind of fluffy. But this one is a little gritty. It's adventure. It's suspense, and kids seem to like that. So, uh, yeah. So that's when I know I've been successful or feel successful, is when the kids really enjoy it and get into it and ask a lot of really good questions when we get to the Q&A part. So,
Well, and speaking of legacy, when your little granddaughter picks up that book to do a book report on, just like one of my granddaughters chose my book to do that book report in high school, and she looked at me and said, Juju, not everybody's grandparent writes a book. So when you hear that come out of your granddaughter's mouth, that's going to be success for you as well.
absolutely. I look forward to that day.
Well, Darcy, this has been a great visit with you here today. And as always, our last interview question is, our
Mhm.
writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
I do. I guess the advice I would give is everybody has experiences, especially when you get to this stage in your life. You have gone through stuff in your life. Why not share that with people? It may not seem significant to you at the moment, but like with my great 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 grandfather, he probably thought his life was pretty mundane, other than his warriors, and nobody would ever care. Little did he know that 200 years later, yeah, there's somebody that really is interested in who he was and what did he think and how was his life. So I have no idea 200 years from now who might be out there wanting to read my books or know about anything, but it doesn't even have to be a book. You could write it down in a journal, write it down in letters, publish it someplace or somehow so that it can be passed down. I don't trust electronic medium of not getting lost or deleted over the years. So I think it's a good idea to put things down on paper and in a book. And with self-publishing becoming so easy nowadays and inexpensive. You can write your own book, especially if there's no illustrations or very few illustrations. You can upload it to Amazon and other places, and it almost costs nothing to get it out there anywhere anyway, and have it available with your name out there that people can research and find it.
It is quite a legacy, and you are certainly leaving one with your military service and now your service to our schools. So we just appreciate you so much and all that you're doing to leave that legacy. So thank you for being with us here today, and we're excited to now call you one of our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you for what you do also.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.